What's up, guys? Welcome to Wendy's shitty crash course on faa0. This guide's probably going to be more of an overview of the mechanics and explaining some of the minutiae of the raid. I'll be running through pretty much all the info about the raid, getting most of my stuff from the wiki and from my own personal experience. Basically what I mean is it's not going to be like a setup guide, so if you want to look for those, there's plenty of those online. The raid is technically the hardest raid in the game right now, even though in my humble opinion, I think it's easier than Hexa because Hexa's pacing is really messed up right now. The raid is pretty fun once you learn it, and a lot of the mechanics being callbacks to the OG Fa hard is pretty fun as well. That being said, I'll just get right to the point. First things first, why even run faa0? If you didn't already know, faa0, much like the OG Fa, is essential for upgrading your Dark Opus weapon, which is the centerpiece of nearly every grid in Grand Blue Fantasy. Like I said before, this raid references the original Fa hard a lot. This includes the tiding mechanic. These tidings are required for the 240 step of the Opus. This means in order to fully upgrade the Opuses of all 6 elements, you will need to get 5 clears in each element. You cannot play only your strongest element. Like every other endgame raid, Fa drops a mat, in this case feathers, which are used for 3 very strong new Opus keys as well as for the Opus Transcendent steps. Moving on, before I get into the specifics of the raid, I have to explain a few mechanics. The first and most important of these mechanics is the end gauge / countdown timer. The end gauge is slowly reduced in real time, with the total time being dependent on the current phase. Most phases have around 9 minutes to fully empty, assuming nothing else affects the gauge. It will also lower if you fail an omen, and the maximum gauge will be reduced if any of your party members is knocked out. The gauge is divided into 6 segments, each denoted by a different color. As the gauge slowly drains, the boss is granted a number of additional buffs depending on which segment is currently being lowered. The white segment has no effects. The light yellow segment grants the boss 1000 supplemental damage. The yellow segment grants the boss 1000 supplemental damage, nullifies all white cuts, and grants the boss Godsight. The light orange segment grants the boss 1000 supplemental damage, and randomly applies 2 debuffs to all allies per turn. The orange segment grants the boss 1000 supplemental damage, double strike, and echo. The red segment grants the boss 1000 supplemental damage, and ignores defense. All of these effects are cumulative. The further you are in the end gauge, the more the buffs stack up. For example, if you were at the light orange segment, the boss would have 3000 total supplemental damage, randomly applied 2 debuffs, and have Godsight and nullified white cuts. If the end gauge is reduced to 0 for any reason, the boss will instantly ready the party wipe omen, the end. Any debuffs and damage you attempt to apply once this omen is readied will be completely nullified. Keep in mind that due to the real-time nature of the end gauge, this trigger will be ready during your turn even if you have not attacked. This makes it important that you attack before the gauge is fully empty so that you maximize your damage output. In summary, like most current V2 endgame raids, there is a heavy emphasis on clearing all of the omens rather than mitigating them. While the gauge might be intimidating at first, you should not be concerned about the level of the gauge until the yellow segment. The Godsight can cause any failed omens and the blue apple debuffs to disrupt your ability to clear future omens. This is also one of the primary reasons that people bring clear or ask for clear. At the light orange segment, the normal attack damage from Fa starts to deal serious damage, and past this point the double strike and supplemental damage will severely punish or kill any setups that lack defensive power or sustain. If you are at the red segment, you are pretty much dead. So taking turns is inadvisable unless you are simply trying to do as much damage before you die. The gauge will reset between every phase, so if you're unsure about whether or not you can still move, simply wait until the next breakpoint. The next major mechanic to take note of is the apple buffs. A random pair of these 4 buffs are applied to all 4 frontline characters at the start of the first phase and the third phase. The buffs last 10 turns or until you trigger the removal condition, which requires you to use a skill of the same border color as the apple. The green apple causes you to take 5000 plain damage per turn. If you use a green border skill, it lowers that character's skill cooldowns by 3 turns and inflicts a 2-turn unremovable blind. The yellow apple lowers your accuracy, meaning that you will randomly miss skills, normal attacks, and charge attacks. If you use a yellow border skill, it gives that character charge attack reactivation for 1 turn, and inflicts a 3-turn unremovable zombified. The red apple cuts your charge bar gain by 50%. If you use a red border skill, it grants that character double strike for 1 turn, lowers their charge bar by 100%, and applies a supplemental damage debuff for 2 turns. The blue apple randomly applies a debuff every turn. If you use a blue border skill, it grants that character a 3-hit flurry for 1 turn, and applies an unremovable skill seal for 2 turns. In summary, the apple buffs are likely the main thing that will trip new players up when they first try faa. These buffs will heavily influence your skill press order as well as the ability to cancel omens, so keep their passive and removal effects in mind when you are taking turns. While it is in your best interest to remove the apple buffs as soon as possible, sometimes it is better to remove them at a specific moment. For example, the CA reactivation from yellow apple and the double strike from red apple can help you cancel certain omens. The last mechanic to quickly mention is Tessera. Tessera is a trigger that only occurs if you cancel a full diamond omen without taking a turn during Phase 1 and Phase 3. There isn't a lot to be said about this omen, just keep in mind you may be randomly faced with an extra omen. While it doesn't hit very hard, it lowers the end gauge and full cuts your charge bar, which can be problematic for some setups. Moving on, faa0 is split into 4 phases, denoted by the resets of the end gauge. Phase 1 begins like the OG faa, with a Paradise Lost opener dealing 50,000 plane damage to your entire frontline. As mentioned before, this also applies 2 random apple buffs to your entire frontline. Instantly after the opener, faa readies the 100% trigger, the end. This trigger is cancelled by dealing 30 million damage, which is seemingly very simple, but should you fail to cancel it, you will instantly wipe your party. My personal advice is if you are nearer to the raid or unsure about the strength of your setup, it is better to overspend resources to cancel rather than risk dying on turn 1 and looking a little bit silly. Phase 1 continues with the 95 trigger, which is a gauntlet of 3 omens. Axion, which is cancelled by dealing 4 triple attacks. Ficus, which is cancelled by dealing 20 million CA damage. Sephiroth, which is cancelled by dealing 15 million skill damage. These will always be the same, and are very straightforward. Just make sure you have enough resources to cancel these omens. The triple attack omen should be paid careful attention to because of the multi-attack seal debuff that you can randomly get from either the blue apple or the gauge timer. After clearing these 3 omens, faa will use one of 2 full diamond omens, Iblis and Phosphorus. Both of these are pretty straightforward, but keep in mind if you cancel on your turn without attacking, you will possibly trigger Tessera. If you are struggling during this phase, you can stop moving until 80 as long as you have cancelled one of the 95 omens. The end gauge will reset at 80 as long as you do not have an omen ready. Phase 2 begins at 80% with the trigger Orbital Resonance. Orbital Resonance gives the boss either the Repudiation or Renunciation buff. These 2 buffs are persistent until the end of Phase 2, change the full diamond omen, and provide the boss the following 2 passive effects. Repudiation passively triggers a full team-wide charge bar cut and a damage cat buff to faa every turn your team lands less than 25 hits. The full diamond omen's cancel condition becomes charge attack 4 times. Renunciation passively grants the boss a repel and a damage cat buff every turn your team does not triple attack 2 or more times. The full diamond omen's cancel condition becomes triple attack 3 times. After Orbital Resonance, there will be another gauntlet of 3 omens depending on which type of damage you dealt the most in Phase 1. Normal attack and counter damage will have the following 3 cancel conditions. Skill damage will have the following 3 cancel conditions. Charge attack damage will have the following 3 cancel conditions. Any other type of damage, including Fated Chain, Summon Calls, or Chain Bursts, will have the following 3 cancel conditions. Once you clear this gauntlet, Faa will only use the full diamond omen associated with the buff he gained from orbital resonance. Like the previous phase, if you are struggling to clear omens, you should attempt to clear at least one of the gauntlet omens, then wait until 60 as the end gauge will once again reset as long as you have no omens readied. One final thing to note is that if you did not cancel a single 95 gauntlet omen, the boss will ready the omen Paradise Lost, which deals 50,000 plane damage and drains the end gauge. Phase 3 begins at 60%. Faa will ready the omen's 7 trumpets. This omen will clear all of the debuffs on faa0 for the first person to eat the omen. Therefore, this threshold functions similar to the 40% Iridis Liberatio in Hexa. The common etiquette is to ready the omen and wait until all 6 players are prepared to cross before tanking it. The omen itself grants the boss a set of buffs, and reapplies 2 random apple buffs to your frontline. These buffs are known as labors, and are local, meaning that they only affect your party. Labor 1 dispels 3 buffs from your frontline at the end of the turn. Labor 2 raises the boss's attack, and grants him superior element Echo. Labor 3 deals 10,000 plane damage per turn to all allies. Labor 4 cuts all debuff durations on the boss by 1 turn. Labor 5 greatly increases his triple attack rate. Labor 6 reduces the damage the boss takes. Like Phase 1, Faa has 2 full diamond omens that trigger in this phase, Iblis and Phosphorus, with the following cancel conditions. Do note that these can trigger in the gap between 60% and 55% before the Labor's Gauntlet has begun. This small portion of the health bar is very dangerous to move in, especially with weaker setups, so only take turns if you have to either prepare to cancel the Labor Gauntlet, or no one else is capable of doing so. Upon reaching 55%, Faa will ready 6 omens in sequence, with 1 labor being removed for each omen cancel. The omens are as follows: Charge attack 5 times, attack 6 times, 35 million damage, debuff 10 times, faded chain, and 60 hits. Once you've completed the gauntlet, any labors that you failed to remove will remain on the boss for the remainder of the raid. You can now continue to push the boss until it reaches 20%. Keep in mind that Tessera will trigger as it did in Phase 1. This phase is probably the most difficult portion of the raid, and is responsible for the most wipes. Failing any of the labor omens will deal a huge amount of damage, if not outright kill your frontline. If you are struggling to cancel any of the labors, you can stop and ready an omen to guard, waiting until 20% for the next gauge reset. The final phase of Faa begins at 20%, with the boss readying the omen, Gospel of the End. Like the 60% trigger, you should wait for everyone to be ready before crossing the threshold. Gospel of the End will grant the boss the 7th through 12th labors and deal 10,000 plane damage. When finally eating the omen, remember that you should just attack as normal, since guarding does nothing to the plane damage. Different from the 60% omen is that the Gospel labors are global, and 1 player of each element must work to remove their specific labor, which grant the boss the following buffs. The 7th labor gives the boss an attack and triple attack rate boost. The 8th labor gives the boss a massive defense and debuff resistance boost. The 9th labor gives the boss a flurry effect and uplift. The 10th labor applies a permanent max HP reduction debuff every turn. The 11th labor gives the boss 2 random element echoes. The 12th labor gives the boss God Sight and applies a random debuff every turn. For every labor still active on the boss, the damage dealt to the boss is capped, which means it is important to try to cancel all 6. However, unlike Hexa, Faa is considerably easier to clear with 1 or 2 labors failed depending on which labors are left. The 2 labors that are especially problematic are Labor 9 and Labor 8. Uncleared Labor 9 makes taking turns much more difficult since Faa will ready a full diamond omen every turn instead of every other turn. Labor 8 makes the boss impossible to debuff and reduces his damage taken by a significant amount. Most runs with a failed 8 will not clear. To remove these labors, you must cancel the omen Anti-Vasileia. Faa will ready this omen with one of 3 randomly selected cancel conditions: 66 hits, 12 skills, or charge attack 6 times. If you fail to cancel Anti-Vasileia or cancel it with an instant omen cancel like Sea Splitter or Siete's Faded Chain cancel, Faa will ready it the next turn with another of the unseen cancel conditions until you have seen all 3. If you fail to cancel it the third time you see it, it will be impossible to remove the labor. Once you have cancelled your labor, you should generally wait until all the labors have been cleared before taking more turns so as to not suffer their effects. The last 20% is essentially a straightforward DPS check. You mash as much damage as you can until you run out of end gauge. There are 2 triggers and a full diamond omen to contend with. The full diamond omen is Axion Apocalypse, with the simple cancel condition of using a Faded Chain. The 13% trigger is Phosphorus Apocalypse, which is cancelled by doing 99 million damage. The 6% trigger is Iblis Apocalypse, which is cancelled by doing 99 hits. Many setups like to bring omen cancellers like 000 to handle one of these 2 omens so that they can focus on dealing more damage, but keep in mind that if any of the labors are remaining, the 99 million omen is significantly harder to cancel due to the damage cap. If everything goes to plan at this point, you've likely cleared the raid. Especially with power creep and the better setups existing, it is considerably less difficult to meet the damage requirements to kill. Now that we've covered the little details, I'll give you a quick summary of how to play faa0 starting from the beginning. Phase 1. Eat the Paradise Lost opener. It's only 50,000 damage, and if you've reached this point you should not be too hurt by this trigger. Just tank it and pot, or move on. If you've already gotten your tiding for the element, you can use this opener to sack units to get backliners like Evokers. Clear the End Omen. As I mentioned before, use whatever you need to clear the omen if you're unsure about your setup's damage output. 30 million on turn 1 can be surprisingly difficult to reach, especially if your raid has no dedicated debuffer. One common strategy to reach the 30 million very easily is to call big summons with Baja Transcendence amplification like Baja, Lucy, or Primal Transcendence. You must also pay close attention to your apple buff effects, which can significantly affect your ability to reach 30 mil. For example, if you are relying on a character to use their charge attack to hit the threshold, yellow apple can cause that character's attack to miss, or if you accidentally press a red skill on that character, their entire charge bar will be drained. Clear the 95 Gauntlet. This is always the same and is pretty easy with well-made setups. The 4 triple attack omens should be handled beforehand by making sure you have enough triple attack boost from either your grid or from characters. But make sure to clear the random triple attack seal debuff or ask for a clear before you move. Phase 2. Clear the 80 Gauntlet. These 3 omens will almost always be the same for you if your setup is consistent. You just have to learn which of the 4 you will get and be ready to cancel it. It is a very straightforward phase, as the Renunciation Repudiation passives for the most part don't matter other than the charge bar cut. Focus more on the Gauntlet omens than fulfilling these passives. Before you reach 60, try to save charge bar to get ready for the first labor, as it will always be 5 CA. Phase 3. Wait at 60% for everyone. The debuff clear can be problematic for people who have weaker setups, and might kill them before they even reach 60%. Tank the 7 Trumpets Omen. This omen does a fair amount of damage, so if you're unsure about how tanky your setup is, just guard it. Push to 55, or if you are not confident, wait for 55. Once the raid has reached 55, clear the Labor Gauntlet. The way in which you handle the 6 omens depends on your setup, and you should practice to get your approach consistent. push to 20%. Pushing to 20% is very simple, as the full diamond omen conditions are easy to cancel if you prepared your setup correctly. You should save skills and meter before the 20% omen hits, because anti-vasileia usually requires a number of skill presses to cancel. Phase 4. Wait at 20% for everyone. Crossing the threshold will spawn the global labors, meaning that anyone that is not ready to eat the 20% omen will likely take a bunch of damage for no reason. Tank Gospel. As I mentioned before, Gospel of the End only does 10,000 plane damage, so guarding it is useless. You should attack, but make sure not to use your charge attack as you might need them to cancel anti-vasileia. Clear anti-vasileia. You can reroll if you guard this omen or use a free cancel, but just be aware that this omen does a significant amount of damage. Push it to 0. The last section of the raid is very simple. Just do damage until you die. Be sure to save your Fata chain for full diamond omens unless you need it for more damage, or if you're on your last turn and you're trying to do as much damage as possible. That's pretty much it for faa0. It's not a very complex raid, although the mechanics take a bit of time to understand. One final little note is that there is actually a way to clear this without really contributing, and it's called labor botting. And the way that works is I'll give you a quick rundown of how that works. You basically just eat the opener, you wait until 95%, you clear the 30 million omen, that should ready the first 95 gauntlet omen, you sit there until 80%, you clear the 95 omen, that should ready orbital resonance, which you tank, and that should ready the first 80 gauntlet omen. Then you wait until 60%, you sticker as normal, wait for everyone else, you clear the 80 gauntlet omen, which should ready 7 trumpets. Then you just wait until 20%, you eat the 7 trumpets omen, you ready gospel, you wait for everyone else, tank gospel, clear anti-vasileia, wait until 0%. Pretty much it. That's the bare minimum strategy labor bot for getting a Titan clear, but keep in mind that that does place the burden on your raid mates for making up for the fact that there's a person that's doing literally no damage. But yeah, that's pretty much everything. If you like this guide, I don't really care, because I'm not going to make another one. Thanks for watching my shitty breakdown of faa0.